Bienvenidas a todas las personas que hay conectadas en este momento.
Welcome, all of you. Welcome, everybody. So we will now start this wonderful webinar on this Friday afternoon. Unfortunately, we have to see each other through the screen. This is the time we are actually going through. So, first of all, I'm going to give you some housekeeping issues, okay? That will be appearing on the screen, okay? First of all, you have to remember that this session will be recorded. So we are fortunate that people who will not be able to attend this meeting, well, they will be able to enjoy the webinar afterwards because it's going to be posted on the WILPF website and its YouTube channel. You have to remember that we will use two languages, both Spanish and English. For that, we have simultaneous interpretation. People who have never enjoyed that service with Zoom, below the screen you can see an icon of the earth, and there you'll find English and Spanish. And that's the language you will be listening to. If you want to listen to the conference in English, you have to push English. If you want to listen to it in Spanish, you have to push Spanish. After the three presentations, we will start with the Q&A. Well, given that we have little time, it will have to be done through the chat. There is a lid that says chat, and you can open up the window or you can send your questions or share your thoughts at the end of the three presentations. And then, of course, we are also on the social media, talking about all of the things that will be happening in this webinar. This is the hashtags, both in English and in Spanish. Feminist peace, women WPS in 2020, and UNSCR 1325. These will be the hashtags for the session. Fine. Having said that, first of all, okay, now I have the honor to introduce this cycle of webinars that we have entitled 20 Years of the Gender, Peace and Security Agenda. You start not because I am the one who is supposed to do it, but by chance, I will be the one having the floor. So I want to thank you. I want to thank from the bottom of my heart. I mean, because it has not been easy to organize it with so many organizations involved, the Spanish section of the International Women's League for Peace and Freedom, and also all of the organizations with whom we have been working. The Alliance for Solidarity, with the International Catalonian Institute for Peace, the School of Cultural Peace, ESIP Center, the Delard Center, and the Malaga University, where I work. My name is Carolina Jiménez, and I'm a professor of public international law at the University of Malaga. And I am part of the board of WILPF Spain, and I will be moderating this webinar. The cycle is composed of 3 webinars. This is the first Friday afternoon, and I thank you for all of you to be here and attending also next Friday and also on the 20th. All of the webinars will be at the same time and with the same platform, with Zoom. And the 3 have been organized by these wonderful group organizations with whom we have established wonderful channels and synergies that can actually be seen. They can be materialized in this webinar. This is the outcome that the Alliance is giving us. all of the people who are doing research for peace and gender in order to be all together in an event like this one, which, as I'm telling you, has been the outcome of the product of many people's work. So I thank all of the organizations, all of the participating organizations, and all of the thinkers and participants to be here with us, not only today, but also in the next 2 webinars. So now, let's start today's webinar. The first one, and today is Friday, the 6th of November, it has as a title, the Gender, Peace and Security Agenda in its 20th anniversary, a transforming agenda. I think this is a good question, especially when we have been working for not only days, but weeks on these analyses, this retrospective view of what has been done during these past 20 years. However, there are still many pending issues, and there are many in-depth analyses that are needed in order to understand what has been the real impact of that resolution. That resolution was a real landmark. It brought to the international agenda issues that had been forgotten or overlooked or had been marginalized. I even devoted my PhD dissertation to that. I have carried out many research studies about this, but we need to stop and think and wonder, has this agenda been a transforming one, or could it be so in the future? And for that, we have today's section, in which we have 3 exceptional speakers. We start this webinar with an excellent level. These 3 speakers are fully committed to the process of women, peace, and security. Let me introduce each one of them before giving them the floor. Each one of them will be talking for about 15 to 20 minutes, and at the end of the 3 presentations, we will open up a Q&A section to share questions and thoughts, which will be very, very enriching. Because at the end of the day, what we want is to have a rich dialogue in which we make all of the voices present here be heard. So to start, we will listen to Madeleine Rees, who is the Secretary General of WILPF International. WILPF is the International League of Women for Peace and Freedom, the oldest women's organization fighting for peace and for freedom, and to find other ways of solving conflict. Of course, our speaker has a very long-standing experience, and it's a great honor to have her with us. She has been working as a lawyer, and that's why she has precised, specific legal concepts like discrimination in the International Human Rights Court and the European Union's. She has worked also at the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights. Not only in Bosnia, where she had a chance to denounce the exploitation of women by the Blue Helmet of the United Nations. She appears in the film Whistleblower, which I recommend. But whistleblowers. But I would like to take any time from her time. So I'd like to highlight her continuous work for the cause of peace with a gender perspective. And so many publications and analyses that she has carried out. And today's presentation by Madeleine will show us the keys we have to highlight from these past 20 years and for the next 20 years. So without any further ado, Madeleine, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. That's a really kind introduction, Carolina. So it's the older you get, the longer the introductions take. We shall have to cut them. I'm really, really happy to be part of this webinar. Congratulations to all of you for putting it together. I'm sitting here in New York, and as we speak, there's another sort of transformation going on, we hope, with the orange man hopefully going to be escorted from the White House shortly. One lives in hope. And that actually is a very important moment, because when we're talking about a women, peace and security agenda, it's been really under huge threat over the last 4 years in particular, which we can discuss a little later. What I wanted to do, I thought it'd be helpful if I just a very quick overview of where we've come from since 2000, where we are now, what are the important things that have happened, to take you into the latest open debate, which happened in October, on October 29th, and how that actually shows the difficulties and tensions there are with having an agenda so important actually sitting in the Security Council. And then lastly, I want to just go ways forward. How do we continue to make the changes that we need in order to have this transformative justice approach that WILPF has been pushing? So going back to 1325, 20 years ago, WILPF was very much engaged in promoting the whole agenda of a women, peace and security agenda in the Security Council, at least for the initial phase. But within a very short period of time, all the language that WILPF wanted in there, and so this is before my time, but of course WILPF was pushing for disarmament, control of arms trade, looking at the root causes of why there was conflict, so you could have women and peace in security and human security. But that was not the language that actually was manifested in the actual resolution 1325, but 4 good principles were there. And it became, as you all know, 1325 was the most known resolution of all Security Council resolutions, I think. Women around the world claimed it as the beginning of a transformative agenda, despite its sort of imperfect language. Women organized, and the first one was in Kosovo, where there was the first peace process after the passage of 1325, and nothing happened. They were not included. It was done in the same way as these peace processes had traditionally been done, without the participation of women. But I don't know whether you have this expression in Spanish, but we have one in English, which is, you know, the resolutions became like buses. You wait around for hours for one to turn up, and then they all come at once. So in 2008, 2009, we had a ton of resolutions all coming forward, with a focus very specifically on sexual violence in armed conflict, which is one of the issues that then became the main way in which the Security Council focused its attention on it. It called on the ending of sexual violence in armed conflict, good, obviously. It focused very much on it being used as a tactic and a weapon of war, good, reflecting decisions from the ICTY and ICTR. It also set up the mechanism for the special representative and demanded accountability, all of which is good. But there was 3-4 resolutions solely on that topic, which made it appear very much as if the real focus of attention was on women as victims of sexual violence, not as active participants in bringing peace. And of course, WILPF was very active in monitoring and trying to input language into these resolutions. And 1889 is the one we like best, because it actually does refer to the context in which violence against women occurs in conflict and the build up to conflict, as rooted very much in economy and militarism. We didn't get militarism, but we did get the importance of economic sustainability for women in 1889, so we like that one. And then we have survivor-centered approach in 2467, which was the last of the substantive resolutions before we move into the South African one of earlier this year. And I've got to say, it is a little bit a bit of a vanity project for many governments. They become the they hold the presidency of the Security Council, and I think it's very important that they announce their commitment to women, peace and security by drafting another resolution. And that's sort of where we are right now. We have gotten, the language is very, very important, because what has happened over this 20-year period is we've moved from the vaguer language of 1325 into greater specificity and much more inclusion of law, which is good, because we used to have just the Beijing Platform for Action and CEDAW in the preamble, we all recall, but not in the operational paragraphs of the resolutions, which are fundamentally important. Now we do. 2467 was quite a leap forward in that, and it actually cited CEDAW and General Recommendation 30 in its operational paragraphs. So that's really good because it means we're making the links between the necessity of security being bound up in and resting entirely on human rights. So some of it we like. I think it's having a survivor-centered approach changed the language a little bit from victim to survivor, which also is good. But also over the last few resolutions, we've moved into inclusion of language on women human rights defenders, on the participation of civil society, all of which has been building, if you like, on the initial resolutions as the Security Council has learned from us what needs to be done in order to have that effective participation. But the criticism I have of it, of many of the resolutions and the approaches we're taking, is we still see an essentializing role, that basically women are seen as the bringers of peace or the victims of the violence. And so we still haven't really changed that narrative to understand exactly what it is that needs to be done in order to have effective participation and what that means. And part of it's a problem of this binary notion we start off at the beginning. I'm very glad you say gender and transformative agenda, because by calling it the women, peace and security agenda, the boys immediately thought it was nothing to do with them. You know, it was sort of, oh, well, that's women, peace and security. What do women do? They should participate, they can bring peace, and they are victims. And that really has thrown us off, I think, in many ways, in the approaches we could have been taking. Fast forward to now, to October, and weren't we lucky that it was Russia that held the presidency just at the 20th anniversary? Because of course, everyone wanted the glorious resolution. If we wanted a resolution, we wanted a glorious one, just to really show that women were being taken seriously, that gender analysis was going to be done, that we were understanding what has to happen in order to effect a peace process from beginning to end, and how to move to transformative justice at the ending of the peace process, how to get to a transformative justice during a peace process, which, as we know, will always take years and years and years to unfold. But we didn't get there because we had Russia sitting on this resolution. We didn't think they'd do it. Many of us beforehand were thinking, it's so ironic that Russia, who has opposed having women, peace and security agenda in the Security Council, is actually going to have a resolution. So we wondered what it was going to be. One thought was that it would just say the Security Council transfers responsibility of this agenda to the General Assembly, which might have been a very good thing, in fact. But they didn't. Instead, we actually had what I thought was a very good resolution, in as much as it recalled all the previous resolutions and called for their full implementation. Now that's a big one, because it's something we've all been talking about all this time, is where is the implementation of the resolutions? And I'll come to that more in a moment. But it had that. And one of the concerns we had in the NGO working group was, why were they being so supportive in that initial paragraph? And this goes back to the conversation about the orange man in the White House. The United States has been rampantly opposed to sexual and reproductive rights, as you know. And so they have been opposing any language for the last 4 years, which could be in any way associated with the promotion and protection of sexual and reproductive rights. So by putting that in, it was thought that they were trying to poke the United States into vetoing a resolution, which of course would be very nice for the Russians, because they get what they don't want, which is a nice resolution, and look, makes those people who had been champions of women, peace and security look extraordinarily bad on the anniversary of the resolutions. It then descended into exactly what it always descends into, which is a game. And I hate to say that, but it's a game. Everybody piles in, everybody has a view, everybody starts worrying about the minutiae of language in each part of the resolution. And this is, as I say, it's good, language matters. But it also means that you get this dance going on between the different states, the good states, the bad states, the indifferent states, and you're not getting honesty and clarity in what needs to be done. And you have the NGO working group working hard together. It's almost like to push their hands against the portal of the ship whilst the water is pouring in, to try to stop bad things happening. And in the end, with this one, if you listen to the actual debate itself, I think it was extraordinary, because we had excellent interventions, and all praise to the Dominican Republic and to St. Vincent and Grenadines. They could join WILPF. I mean, their analysis was absolutely spot on. They were talking about it was structural. There were structural obstacles to women's participation in peace process caused by patriarchy, by militarism, by capitalism as exposed through neoliberal policies. And, you know, that's the sort of thing we want in a resolution, of course, but not the sort of thing we're going to get, because, as again, you are all fully aware, that would tap into what WILPF was asking for in the first place. The ending of the arms trade, the ending of militarization as a modus of securitization, so that we can actually focus on peace. So whilst there was great intervention from some states, there was a fabulous intervention as well from a woman from Afghanistan who was reminding us that as this resolution was being discussed, so the killing in Afghanistan, the lack of participation of women was ongoing. So basically, where did we get? The resolution as it stood had no reference to civil society, had no reference to human rights defenders, did not reference CEDAW, did not reference General Recommendation 30. Now for me, I take a different view from many. I didn't care, because in fact, we've already got that. We had that in the other resolutions. And if we call for the full implementation, we could go back and say, Russia has just endorsed all the language on human rights defenders, all the language on civil society participation, and the need to underpin the resolutions with human rights. But instead, there was pushback. And you know, many commentators are saying that the reason there was pushback was predominantly because it was the Russian resolution. Had it been from another state, then maybe it wouldn't have been so tense, which just shows how our agenda is being played with by the international political games of the P5 in particular, but in particular China, Russia, and the United States, none of whom are committed at all to the women, peace and security agenda, though that may change. So that's where we ended with the debate. Really, it's quite tragic. 10 voted against the resolution, so we don't have one. The whole thing sort of just ended up in a bit of a, hardly a celebration, I think would be the way to put it. Hardly a celebration of 20 years of our grafting. I think, though, that we should not worry too much about that. We know how the Security Council works. You know, I have actually spoken at the Security Council and called out the P5 as the ones who endanger women human rights defenders more than anyone by the continuance of their sales of arms. They don't listen. It's just they're not even paying attention to those arguments, because so embedded in their economic and their approach to power is the arms trading and securitized, militarized security. So what do? We have now 10 resolutions. We have some really excellent possibilities of how we use it. There's a normative framework, and as Leila Aladat always says, a normative framework's no good unless you have hard law to back it up, which is where WILPF and other organizations who work on this come in, because this is what we need to do. It will be no surprise to you when WILPF this year did a report called Where Are the Words? Because what we did is we tracked the language from the resolutions into the country-specific mandates, which is where the rubber hits the road, if you like, because that's where the implementation should happen. That's where the Department of Political and Affairs should be making sure that everything that the Security Council has demanded takes place in the mandate, in the way in which it's implemented. And it would be no surprise to you at all to find that, tragically, the vast majority of country-specific mandates have very, very few references to any of the resolutions. There's usually a throwaway, you know, gender is important, gender shall be mainstream, let's have a gender advisor, but the specificities of it are not there. And neither do we have the important and absolute crucial part of women's civil society informing the United Nations on the ground as to how the resolution should be implemented. So without that, the information that goes back to the Security Council, which should be reflective of the agenda, doesn't reach the Security Council itself. So even though they say they want to be, appraised of this matter, they are not. Because the reports from the Secretary General, from his agencies on the ground, are not providing that information. So we're losing all that incredible work in getting the resolutions in a way which we could use. So this is a challenge for us going forward. And what we have decided now is that, one, we want to push very hard not to have any more resolutions, so we don't have to do this holding the portal closed while bad things pour in on us. We need to actually say, we've got what we've got, no more resolutions. Now, every single time there's a country-specific mandate, let us look at what needs to go in. And that means with fulsome consultation with women's organizations in the country where there's a mandate. What do they want? What do they need? Which of the resolutions must be included in the mandate? And how do we ground that in law on the ground? I think if we do that, we have an accountability mechanism woven into the rollout of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, which would be transformative. Now, the other part is trying to get the UN itself to do that. I was at meetings fairly recently with the head of DPPA, and it struck me that I was having the same conversation that I had 20 years ago. We were still talking about getting women into peace processes, as if we haven't been doing this for 20 years, as if we haven't shown that when you do, it provides for better and more sustainable peace. But it's complicated. And I always come back to that word, it's complicated. Well, it's so complicated, we can't do it. It has to be done. And one thing I think is for the United Nations to do is to not make the first part of negotiation about women and their participation, our participation. It can't be that. Because then that becomes the boys sitting together and saying, well, if you bring two, I'll bring those two, and then we've got women's participation, we've ticked the box, and that's it. That is not how we do it. I think it has got to be just taken as a given that women are going to be participants. So now, what do we do to actually make that happen? And at WILPF, we've been working for many, many years with organizations on the ground to show how you can develop an organic peace process, which is I think, got much greater possibilities of bringing that sustainability than just having a few women sitting at the table handpicked by particular actors. So I will leave it there for the moment because I'm sure there's going to be questions. And I really want to hear it from Manuela and Carolina. So I'm sure we'll come back with more questions, but there is hope even in the midst of political gameplay, shall we say. Thank you.
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias a Madeleine.
Thank you so much, Madeleine. Thank you for ending with this hopeful note. We can't lose our hope. And you have talked about some very relevant issues about the political game that this agenda has been the object of. We can't forget that. And you have also talked about the needed incidents that has to occur in a specific territory, in a specific country mandate, in which there are women who go through violence in peace processes. So that's the perfect field to introduce the presentation of the next speaker, Manuela Mesa. She is an exceptional speaker because she has a long-standing experience in peace studies. She is one of the most relevant researchers in Spain about peace studies. She's the president of Peace and Democracy. She's the deputy chairman of the Spanish chapter of WILPF. She has published many papers and she has participated in many international national congresses. But I'd like to highlight as well that she was one of the first people who were very much aware of what would happen with 1325. And she has been part of the follow-up group that was always following up the response by Spain in the national action plans and also in other international institutions. So I'm going to give her now the floor. She will give us some clues about the issue. So now it's Manuela's turn. Thank you, Carolina, for this presentation. And thank you very much indeed to Laura Alonso, our president, for the support she has given to the organization of this whole cycle. Sandra from ISIP, and all of the people who have made it possible. And to me, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to share this panel with Madeleine and with Maria. So I'm so happy to be here. So I'm going to focus my presentation on the proposals of civil society organizations and what that has implied, what you know, what that has implied, what the gender, peace and security agenda has implied for them. And this is very important. And I can share my own experience. Back in 2009, we started a project called 1,325 Women Needing Peace, in which we wanted to make this resolution be well known by appointing 1,325 women who, throughout history and currently, have made significant contributions to achieving peace. And we did so. We appointed 1,325 women, and I could name at least 220 or 1,088 if we wanted to follow the exercise of filling these resolutions with names that have acted on the gender, peace, and security agenda. I mean, to make the contributions made by so many women for peace is crucial because currently there is still a very little recognition of the role played by women as peace actors in the field of conflict prevention and resolution with regards to justice, political participation, etc. A lot of these women whom we name, we find them afterwards in WILPF International, and this program generated the basis and the network after the 10th anniversary for the foundation of WILPF Spain in 2011. And since then, the work we've been carrying out about the 1325 resolution, which has been very much present in WILPF Spain. And this example illustrates how this resolution is a different resolution from other United Nations resolutions, because it was adopted as the result of work carried out by different social organizations and women's organizations that bet on including the gender perspective in the international agenda. And in 2000 and in the year 2000, this resolution was adopted. And also, it allowed international organizations to internationalize their work because they included this international agenda in the local context. It has worked both ways. During these years, civil society organizations have promoted a very wide agenda that includes different aspects, like prevention, participation, protection, etc., at different levels and in different fields with many, many actors. The real main characters have been women's organizations throughout these years, and this has to be highlighted. They have kept this agenda alive by including the language, as Madeleine has said, in the treaties. I mean, instead of talking about women, we talk about gender now, which is much more complex, and to approach it as a gender of women's rights that's transforming, including feminism and even questioning the concept of international justice by placing people at the very center in this concept of human security. During this year, the work about the resolution 1325 has allowed us to develop an international women's movement that have networked, they have shared analysis, experiences, knowledge, and they have made some significant contributions to the gender, peace, and security agenda, working locally and internationally simultaneously. But the context in which we are now we're celebrating the 20th anniversary, which is very different from the one in 2000, at the time in which multilateralism was going up and the objectives of development for the millennium were developed. All of it was actually crystallized in the 2030 agenda, and how civil society organizations acquired a significant role in the United Nations system, because we can't forget that the United Nations is an intergovernmental system. So they gained a space and they explored new ways of participation in fora and parallel summits. 20 years later, we are at a time of not evolution, but we're going backwards in the United Nations system. And this year, we celebrate the 75th anniversary of its creation. And the institution is facing serious problems. The leadership is being questioned by some governments like the USA, for example, which they ignore, they bypass the institution and they promote racist policies that make us, they remind us of the previous years before the Second World War, the years of fascism with its differences. But it doesn't bring us there. There is a well-coordinated offensive against the gender agenda, what they call the gender ideology, which has been extended in many countries, and it jeopardizes some of the measures that have been adopted in order to make headway in the equality and women's rights agenda. For example, with regards to the Beijing platform and some of the rights that had been already consolidated, especially sexual and reproductive rights, have been questioned to the point that the High Commissioner of the United Nations for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has alerted us about these issues, and she has said that women's rights are not negotiable. But at the same time, in this anniversary, we find a feminist movement that's increasingly strong, more diverse, and it agglutinates millions of people, and it is much stronger than in 2000. And somehow, it has also had the capacity to make proposals and to permeate the agenda of women, peace, and security in specific proposals. I would say that the inclusion of pacifist feminism and to substitute it with a transforming agenda that goes to the root of discrimination that causes violence is one of the issues, one of the aspects that we should point out as well. If I had to think about what are the achievements of this agenda, women, peace and security agenda, I mean, it's a resolution that sometimes you really want to work in favor of it sometimes, and sometimes you just want to leave it aside, you want to ban it because you see no progress. As an achievement, I would say, I would highlight the work in the multilateral level by civil society organizations, international networks, like the NGO groups about women, peace and security. They have done an exceptional piece of work in preparing proposals during these years in order to make progress in this road. They have contributed to the fact that the voice of women working in conflict situations be heard. For example, the area formula. They have proposed some very specific roadmaps with specific proposals about how to orient implementation of the resolution 1325. And I think it's important to recognize this issue. Secondly, national action plans, which is a political incidence plan. Action plans have opened up opportunities for civil society organizations to talk with relevant organizations related to gender and conflict, and to do a follow-up of this. Right now, there are more than 80 action plans in different countries, and the experience is quite unequal, depending on the country. Action plans, in some cases, have allowed us to have a comparative analysis and to use this comparative analysis as a tool for politics, saying, okay, the governments are doing it much better than I. They are counting on civil society. And that's important. Governments like the Dutch government, who had a very participative action plan that included civil society organizations and even women's organizations in conflict areas, and to include a plan that included the proposals. In the case of Spain, Spain adopted the first action plan, and in 2017, the second action plan. The first one in 2007, the second one in 2017. There was a consultation process with civil society organizations. Some of us had the opportunity to participate in this process in different times. The plan was improved in some issues compared to the 2007 plan. It included that the follow-up reports were included in the parliament, were presented in the parliament, that gave them greater relevance. And it included this agenda to the agenda in aid for development, but the demands of civil society were not included in the plan, specifically with regards to the assignment of the human and financial resources and an implementation calendar with some specific commitments and indicators that allowed us to have a real follow-up for implementation. That was not attained. I mean, some do not have financial plans and others do have it. And this is something we aspired. Maybe what's most worrisome in the Spanish case is that a lot of the commitments are pending execution, specifically with regards to the creation of a follow-up group for the plan in which civil society organizations could participate, and the definition of a number of indicators that allowed us to have the right follow-up of the responses. And the criticism that has been done in the case of Spain is the fact that the Ministry of Defense had the leading role above other ministries. So what predominates is a classical security agenda that does not question the role of militarism in armed conflict, and it does not add on a redefinition of security, and it does not include other experiences. The agenda of women, peace and security as a right of women is left at the backstage. And in the case of Spain, there is a gap between the discourse related to gender equality internationally. I mean, the Spanish government does defend truly that agenda with regards to what implementation means in national policies. But it's also fair to say that with this new government, we still have opportunities to make headway in that sense. I mean, there is clearly a difference with the past. And with regards to action plans, I'd like to point out an example that to me is a very interesting one, which is the case of Colombia, which is a country that does not have an action plan, but the 1325 resolution is a very important reference for civil society. And they use it as an instrument for action locally for the definition of policies in favor of achieving peace with a gender perspective. So to sum up, I would say that action plans have actually favored the creation of organization networks, networks of organizations that are very different from each other, and their articulation, I mean, some of them defend pacifism, human rights, and development. And they have created significant spaces to generate knowledge and to collect best practices to make recommendations. And this is also very important to keep it in mind. Although it's also very important that action plans be something that goes beyond a document of good intentions. I mean, they should turn into a real roadmap to make progress and to make headway in this agenda for equality. The third achievement that I'd like to point out is the appropriation of the agenda by local organizations, what has been called the localization of the agenda. It is also very interesting because how at the local level, this agenda has been considered to be the most feasible one. This dissemination of the agenda shows how the support to women's organizations is indeed a safe bet that allows us to have an in-depth knowledge, a wider knowledge about what truly happens in conflict areas, and also to know better the real needs of the population that's victim of violence. And it contributes to the strengthening of the social fabric in which women participate actively. So, which would be the hurdles that this gender, peace and security agenda has faced in the past 20 years? Well, to start, the lack of political will by governments, which implies that many of the proposals to make headway in the implementation of the resolution have not been institutionalized. They are not part of the central core of action, and they are fully dependent on personal discretionality. It is something that can be done or cannot be done. And there is very little link between political documents that describe certain action lines and the actions that are really carried out on the field. To sum up, as has been said in different reports, we have not been able to turn speeches and words into specific facts that imply a transformation of the structures that discriminate and exclude or legitimize violence against women. The second obstacle would be the very limitations presented by the United Nations Security Council, with a structure that makes it very hard to make progress with this agenda. It has been very worrisome, the different attempts during these past 20 years to secure the agenda or to co-opt it. I mean, this agenda, which focuses on women's rights linked to violent extremism, which is something that was promoted by the Spanish government. And it included an aspect that deviated the attention from an issue that, from my perspective, it's a central one. And it was about women's rights. And the very instrumentalization that has been done in certain organizations about the experiences of women in terms of sexual violence or other types of violence, which has been used to justify certain military actions, like in the case of Afghanistan, where it was rather significant and it was very far from the right of women. I mean, there was another concern that was not this one. And lastly, last but not least, the last hurdle I'd like to mention is the very little financial funds directed to this. There has been very little financial contribution to implement this agenda. And with the resources that have been channeled to it, it's impossible to do anything. Let me end with the pending challenges. Madeleine has already mentioned a few of them. But we have to ask ourselves, how can we make headway in the future with this agenda, especially at a time in which there are powers that are trying to cut right down. The proposals or the recommendations made by the global study, which was published in 2015, prepared by Radica Colaplanskos Marawi against armed conflicts transformed into justice and peace. These proposals are still well and alive today, and they stress out the importance of the participation of women in every field related to the construction of peace. It talks about protecting the rights of women and girls during and after the conflict. It talked about the assuring in the planning, the gender perspective, accounting mechanisms, accountability mechanisms, and gender issues with the right funding. Now, these proposals are still very much current, and we need to make headway in a better understanding of what's involved in integrating the perspective, the gender perspective in a peace and security agenda, and especially the development, design and development of policies. We need to go beyond an expression that's used frequently with regards to gender. I mean, we need to include more women. And we do not, without, I mean, we need to question the inequality structures that cause this inequality in the case of women. We need to, I mean, to present the gender peace and security agenda as a women's agenda, as a transforming agenda. It implies questioning and challenging the very concept of international security, and to go to a vision that's much wider about security. Feminist organizations for years have been insisting on the importance of transferring the costs of weapons to social expense. And this is a crucial need, especially given the current situation. Another challenge is to make progress in the intertwining with other agendas, for example, 2030, or anything related to humanitarian aid. And for the agenda, for the gender, peace and security agenda to be a useful tool in the hands of civil society organizations in armed conflict situations, it needs to be a transforming agenda that promotes change. And that, for the time being, is something that we need to build up together in the current context. The current context doesn't allow us to do so. But the fact that the agenda is a transforming agenda is transforming in itself. There is opportunity and hope, especially if we bear in mind that those who have truly defended this agenda are civil society organizations, and that has implied significant progress. We know that this agenda is still very much alive and active in civil society organizations. Thank you for your attention. Well, thank you, Manuela. You have made a very full presentation. You have given us many, many clues. And you have related it very much to what Madeleine has said. This is a webinar in which the three speakers will share their thoughts and perspectives. And then we can all make comments through the chat. So we are all going in the same direction. With regards to national action plans, I just would like to underline that there is a paradox. Even NATO has an action plan about Agenda 1325. Well, at any rate, you have given us many, many clues. And now we will give the floor to the third wonderful speaker. And she's going to have a hard time now because she's the third and last one. But I'm convinced that she will actually complete this webinar wonderfully. María Villellas is a member of the board of WILPF Spain. She's a researcher at the School of Peace Culture. She is also part of a network of mediating women in the Mediterranean. And she herself materializes some of the points mentioned in the gender, peace and security agenda. She has worked in many organizations with a lot of impact. And that's why we will now give her the floor to make a contribution. So whenever you want, Maria, you have the floor. Well, thank you so much, Carolina. Good afternoon, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be here, sharing this discussion with women I truly admire. Women I've been learning from for so many years. Women who are a point of reference in many organizations. Madeleine, I mean, you have made WILPF International grow so much, and Manuela Mesa, and Carmen Magallón. I mean, without you, we would not be here. And I'd like to thank also the friends and colleagues who have been working behind the scenes to organize this seminar. It's a lot of work to organize a webinar like this one, and it's such a pleasure to be able to participate with all of you. As Carolina has just said, I have the hardest task because I'm going to try not to repeat what has been already said. And I'm going to try and contribute with some new ideas. I know that the ideas may be repeated because, well, we all know what the women, peace and security agenda has been for the past 20 years. I mean, it's a shared vision after all. And it is a wonderful opportunity to have this webinar to think all together about so many years of hard work. At the School for the Culture of Peace, we all started working on this back in 2004. And if we look back and to value the work, the hard work carried out by so many women's organizations, not only during these past 20 years, but during the past century, it allows you to feel part of a network of affection and feminist commitment, which is what unites us today. I have entitled my presentation From a Room of My Own to the Group of United Feminism, 20 years in the implementation of the agenda of gender, peace and security. I believe that in these past 20 years, there has been a significant evolution. In 2000, we women needed and demanded to have a room of our own, as our dearest Virginia Woolf proposed. 1325 came to claim the significant role of women in peace, a role that had been denied to us, although we had tried to occupy our post and we had tried to claim our right to it. But 20 years later, in an international context like the one we find ourselves in, with the lack of, with hyper-patriarchal leaderships, as is the case of the USA, although if the orange men will be leaving in a few minutes, the White House, at any case, and Russia, not to mention Russia, as Madeleine has already said. I mean, these patriarchal leaderships are being extended throughout Europe in a context of pandemic and an increasing precariousness. Not only do we need a room of our own, but we need a united feminism room. I don't know if you know this game. It's a sort of a feminist trivial game that was created thanks to a crowdfunding in which a lot of women gave a little bit of money in order to be able to create this game. Instead of earning little slices, you win little cards like with names of significant women like Simone de Beauvoir. And it's a good way of summing and adding knowledge amongst us feminists. So the hurdles and challenges that this agenda poses are so gigantic that they require a good team of pacifist feminists able to be united with their friends, with friends of the anti-racist ecological movement, just to mention just a few of the alliances that I believe are crucial. There have been a lot of progress. Manuela has talked about a few of them, Madeleine too. In addition to the resolutions of the Security Council, during the last 20 years, they have also developed political and regulatory tools like action plans, recommendation number 30 of CEDAW. Institutional figures have been created, very important ones like the special representation to the Secretary General about sexual violence in conflict, or the experts that give her advice, the advisor for women, peace and security issues at the European Union. In other words, there have been some progress at an institutional level. And at the same time, civil society organizations have articulated a large part of these rights based on the demands presented in this agenda. And there have been also cross-sectional initiatives that have united different women, mediating women, diplomats, academic women, to claim an active participation of women in peace negotiations. Civil society, as Manuela and Madeleine have mentioned, have been a key has been a key actor, and women organizations from all over the world have actually devoted themselves to this issue by articulating this effort, both locally and globally. And the participation of women has also grown in peace processes, although in an irregular way. Thanks to the effort made by many, many organizations, sometimes in a well coordinated way with actors from the United Nations. And civil society has also been very active in international significant campaigns, like the ones that we have in the process to approve the arms trade control, or the document to prevent nuclear arms, recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize, in which, well, feminist organizations played a key role. And notwithstanding that, after 20 years, and in spite of all of this progress, this resolution, which has an enormous potential, well, that potential has not been achieved. We still have very many pending challenges ahead. We are in an international context in which there is a significant tension, on the one hand, before the progress made in gender equality and the strength of the feminist movement in its alliance with other movements, like the rights of LGBTI people, and secondly, the consideration of these ultra-conservative leaderships and patriarchal leadership, which have not a single political agenda which concentrate on the restriction of the women's rights and LGBTI people's rights, and to end with this agenda. And they want to end with feminism and the agenda of on gender, peace, and security. And they challenge, because it challenges these patriarchal views of the world. And there are many, many obstacles that have not allowed us to reach the full potential. And women's organizations have constantly put on top of the table this. But in spite of it all, there are many obstacles. Things like, Manuela, you have talked about the space. The very Security Council is an obstacle to this. How this last discussion was in October, as Madeleine has described. The agenda came forth thanks to the promotion of women's organizations in conflict areas. And the Beijing Action Platform made a significant step forward by opening a gap in the almost impossible to reach Security Council. And yet, in the last few years, with this political movements that are so ultra-conservative, we have in the international arena discourses and political practices that promote xenophobia, racism, homophobia, and hatred against women, and they question multilateralism itself. The Security Council is a stage in which these dynamics are acted out. And the very fragile consensus that had been reached around the agenda on women, peace, and security was broken up with the approval of Resolution 2417 in 2019, which was approved with the abstention of China and Russia. But their text had to be widely cut back, as Madeleine has just told us, with regards to the mentions to the sexual and reproductive rights of women, which had to be cut out completely in order to have the support of the United States. In addition to this context, in which, well, the environment has been more hostile against the agenda, there have been also other obstacles that have been present throughout the existence of this agenda from the very onset. Things that have been repeated in the last 20 years. And, well, Madeleine has already mentioned a few of them, like the lack of financial resources, which has been a clear show of the very lack of political will. They just bring forth words as opposed to resources to it. And let me share with you a few data about the economic and financial issue. Out of the 83 national plans and national action plans that we had at the beginning of 2020, only 34% of them had a specific budget for their implementation. Almost 70% of the national action plans had no financial resources whatsoever. And we know that paper can hold just about anything, but it's impossible to be able to implement anything, or at least really transforming policies. And this lack of political will, this very fragile will, has been crucial in the impossibility of applying the agenda. Paradoxically, in the last 20 years, states have tried to occupy a central space by displacing civil society from the leadership it had at the beginning. And what this has had as a result is a total bureaucratization, red tape surrounding the agenda with constant approval of new resolutions, which without it being implemented practically. I remember that during the celebration of the 10th anniversary, when Resolution 2248 was presented, and as Manuela has said, the Spanish government had a significant role in it, civil society said that that was not the time to approve a new resolution. The time had come to show a real commitment with the resolutions that had already been approved. And afterwards, this trend has increased, even more so with the approval of new resolutions, which have brought us to the exclusion of some rights recognized, especially in the sexual and reproductive field. So we can't separate the protection of women against gender-based violence from their participation in the recognition of the rights, in the guarantee, in giving guarantees for the preservation of their fundamental rights. Now, this uncertain scenario with fragile political wills and uncertain progress, but with 20 years of implementation, allows us to have a certain perspective in order to assess it, but also to identify some of the challenges for the near future. And I believe that we need to focus on this part. We need to make an assessment. And I think it's crucial to actually face the issue and see how we will actually meet the challenges we have ahead. I believe that these years have shown that the agenda is a very wide-scoping agenda, and that has been a significant point for the actors in charge of implementing it. But this wide scope, whilst it implies a challenge, it also gives us it gives it a transforming character. It allows us to be well aligned with our feminist vision. It allows us to approach integrally the causes and the consequences of violence, short, medium, and long term, with all of its complexity and with all of its width, and not just focusing on some specific issues that are interesting to states or to organizations in a certain movement. But feminist, pacifist women must face that complexity and put it on the discussion table. To adjust to some of the future challenges we face, we need to keep on widening our action field whilst we actually make the agenda more visible. In other words, we cannot build up any right. We have to strengthen a preventive gaze, the prevention of violence, which is a crucial contribution made by women's organizations, which always place the emphasis on that issue. Well, we need to strengthen that preventive gaze, and this is what we try to do. We try to respond to the agenda, and whilst we consolidate the progress we have made in terms of participation. I think we need a greater demand, pose a greater demand to the actors participating in peace processes. We need to demand that a significant participation, the significant participation of women the inclusion of gender perspective in peace agreements becomes a reality. And our colleagues who will be on the webinar next Friday will deal with this issue of women's participation. But I believe that they are facilitating, they're easing, peace processes, and they need to see the example made by mediating teams with women with a gender perspective. The time is ripe to say that not only we need to be present in negotiating tables, but we should overturn it. We cannot just obey patriarchal rationales. It's also important to highlight the role played by other social actors for the development of the agenda, like, for example, the defenders of human rights, who are currently victims of many, many threats against their lives and the application of their own rights. We need to double the efforts made to guarantee their protection and at the same time to strengthen the political participation. And from that point of view, I believe that we have ahead of us a very significant challenge to be able to intertwine all of these with other crucial agendas. Madeleine has mentioned some of them. Agenda 23, I'm going to refer to others, which are also tremendously important for the next 20 years. The time has come to overcome this binary outlook, as Madeleine has said. To just place women at the very center. I think we should also try to include bases that strengthen the intersectionality within the agenda and the recognition of the fact that the impact of violence, that violence does not only impact women, but it impacts many other people. And we should strengthen the alliance between the feminist movement and the movement for the rights of the LGBTI people. And it's an agenda that can only, it's an alliance that can only strengthen our shared agendas. And it is a crucial challenge. We need to strengthen our alliance with the agenda about women and of young people and participation, which is also very strong. And internationally, young people are becoming a crucial political actor. And here too, I also believe it's important to express by linking up all of these agendas with this global justice agenda, in which young people are also playing a leading role in claiming their struggle against climate change and the degradation of the natural environment. It is crucial that all of the efforts made to face the climate challenge is an intersectional gender approach that approaches inequalities that are growing as a result of the climatic emergency. But at the same time, the women, peace and security agenda should also include this climate justice approach and this environmental justice approach. And here we have a significant opportunity because the ecologist movement and the movement of women for peace are close movements. They're sister movements. The very same women have actually led both movements. The movement against nuclear weapons is a clear example of that. And right now, it's crucial that we strengthen it in order to make joint efforts to face the climate emergency with a women's and peace gaze and a gaze of the LGBTI and women's rights. And the climate emergency is also having a big impact on all of us. The pandemic we are in the midst of implies that the climate emergency becomes even more important. As caregivers in the planet, we will be able to face all of this. We have a lot to contribute in terms of security, caregiving, human security, security from a more holistic point of view that puts people at the center and not armies and states. So, I believe that in an international context of increasing militarism, of patriarchal leaderships, in the very midst of a very serious pandemic, the international agenda about gender, peace, and security is a very useful and efficient tool for the construction of a transforming peace that can face complex armed conflicts globally, or the climate emergency that I've already mentioned. But we also have local challenges ahead, like the situation of women who defend human rights. The agenda should be useful for the transformation of peace, global peace and security policies, and this can only be attained with political will by states, with a well-coordinated action of all of the stakeholders. But given the current context, for the agenda to be truly transforming, it is crucial that civil society and women's organizations become the stepping stone for this agenda, whilst keeping the gaze on the identification of weaknesses and also the identification of opportunities and gaps through which and cracks through which we can keep on trying to give our feminist and pacifist view to attain a full implementation of the agenda. Thank you. Well, thank you, Maria, for this presentation. Wow, you have really gone beyond the goal. As you have said, the agenda is wide-scoping, and there are many, many elements to be taken into account. The three speakers have really covered a very wide ground in an in-depth way, because of course you have been studying this women, peace and security agenda for a long time. Now, well, as you have all said, we have enough knowledge about the rules, regulations, international law, and rights stemming from national and international law. Of course, we have still open challenges, especially in conflict and post-conflict areas, as you have pointed out. Now, all of the issues you have mentioned, which I'm sure have motivated more than one thought. Of course, we have to end at 6 o'clock, but we need to start the Q&A. Questions to the three speakers who have been talking about about Agenda 1325. So, please ask specific questions. And whilst you ask your questions, I'd like to ask to the three of you. Maria has already talked about it, but I'd like to go a bit beyond. In these times of pandemic, how do you believe this is affecting the women, peace and security agenda? How is the women, peace and security agenda being affected by the pandemic?
I'm happy to jump in and answer at least part of that, because I think it's been very, very difficult for us to continue to participate within the multilateral system in the way that we did. WILPF has just done a report showing how restrictive the participation of civil society has become as a result of the pandemic. It is also, I think, and more importantly, that's one element, but more importantly, the pandemic within the pandemic of the violence against women has restricted women's ability to participate. And of course, the economic impacts are being felt mostly more by women, disproportionately by women, which again impacts directly on our abilities to change the political economies within which we have to live. Plus, of course, the care economy is normally and almost very substantially it's done by women. And that has really been brought out through the pandemic. So all if you like, the cultural portrayal of women as it traditionally has been really exposed by the pandemic. You know, basically economic disenfranchisement, extremities of violence, but still get on and do the care girls. And that, I think, is inimical to effective participation. So it has pushed the agenda back at the ground, if you like, rather than just in the Security Council. And I think just to follow up on that, I think it is extremely important that we link these issues. WILPF has just published the principles for post-COVID settlement, which we did for the General Assembly with the FIRE Consortium. And we did it for that for a very specific reason, to try and bring these issues in, the necessity of a ceasefire, the necessity of addressing violence against women in particular, but not only women, in the context of the pandemic. We need to address, obviously, the healthcare provisions, but looking at it and framing it, if you like, within the political economy and within the militarized space. And we reckon if you did all of those things, that's going to have an immediate impact on the most important threat facing us all, which is environmental degradation. So if we put all those things front and center of our concerns, our advocacy, our action, then I think we're going to be pushing towards, and I was really pushing forward with the implementation of the transformative promise of the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And I was really taken by what you said, Manuela, about the localization of the national action plans and how you do that, because that goes to the core of what we hope we will be able to do if we ground the principles, because it is that thing, isn't it? That wonderful feminist expression of think globally, act locally. And that's what we have to be doing, I think, in order to make sure that this is not lost in the huge pushback we're having by patriarchy at the moment.
Absolutamente. No sé si Manuela o María quieren añadir.
Absolutely, Madeleine. I don't know whether Manuela or Maria would like to add anything else to what has already been said by Madeleine. Well, I do believe that the pandemic has also opened up a unique opportunity to talk about military expenses, to challenge military expenses. This is an old claim of ours, but now it's even more difficult for governments to convince people that the priority is to keep on buying weapons, sophisticated weapons, when they haven't got enough money for masks. So I think it's a window of opportunities opening up in order to contest these military policies that, regardless of the ideological approach, I mean, when the situation doesn't justify it. And I mean, we've been claiming that for ages now. But I believe that this is a discussion, this is a debate that we can win. We can contest this militarism in this context. Fine. So now I'm going to give the floor virtually to a question that has come through the chat by Pilar. Pilar says, we have talked a lot about the difficulties and the challenges, but she asks us to elaborate on what has the agenda been useful for in the past 20 years, with some specific examples. In armed conflicts, I mean, we know that the regulatory framework is very large. Do you have any information about what it has been useful for specifically in conflict or post-conflict situations? Well, I could start. If our comrades from WILPF Colombia were here, they could share with us wonderfully how Resolution 1325 has been very useful indeed to make Colombian women to play a significant role in the Colombian peace process. Although it is the very best example we have at hand, I mean, a peace agreement was reached with a gender perspective, not only women as victims, but also women as peace promoters. we find that at a local level, there are many women's organizations who are working in violence contexts, and the resolution has been a tool that allows them to play a leading role in their peace construction work. I believe that agendas are local agendas for women's organizations. It is important that we strengthen these agendas. We should never lose them. But we have to know that internationally, the agenda is a tool that places civil society in front of governments with a different position, in a stronger position. Women in many places have been able to open themselves a space in local peace processes, but not only locally, the very process of empowering of many women's organizations. I mean, with all of its international sections, maybe Madeleine could give us some specific example, but all of our comrades in Africa and in Asia, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and in many other places who have used Resolution 1325 in conflict contexts to place their claims and to strengthen those claims. Anything else to add with regards to that question, please?
I think just to follow up from Maria, I completely echo the fact that it is a real rallying cry. Whatever happened at the Security Council, what women have done with that is quite incredible. So you have women in Yemen who will actually say, I'm not going to wait for an invitation to come to the peace process, I'm here. The women from Afghanistan did the same. And I think that has got to be the way forward. It's not to wait patiently for them to give us the implementations. We take it. They've given us the normative framework after we fought to get it. Now we have to ground it. And just one plea as well, I think that there probably aren't many people on the webinar who are going to be, who live in states which are coming up for the presidency of the Security Council. But one thing we must do is make sure that none of them do a vanity project and start introducing unnecessary things. What we want is for them to insist on the implementation of what we've got, so that those women like Raja and co from Yemen who go anyway will get the support they need. And just one thing, I think we're again seeing, as you're on the Women's Mediators Network, I think this is really so important. We need the mediators networks to actually have teams that work with civil society, women's organizations on the ground in these conflict countries, giving them support on how to use and how to claim their rights, given that we've obtained through the Women, Peace and Security agenda. There's things we can do. There's an awful lot of things we can do. And I think, but the most important thing is that it's so far, it's the women themselves have picked this up, run with it, it's ours. And we're going to have to see it through right to the very end. We don't wait for the invitation.
Sí, yo creo que hay tantas experiencias bonitas. Yo recuerdo en el aniversario de 2015 de la resolución que justamente estaba Anita, que es de WILPF
from WILPF Congo, and she talked to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Margaret Wallström, over there, and she had a chance to know Margaret Wallström when she was responsible for sexual violence issues. So the experience of working locally and to have an influence internationally is crucial in order to feel, in order to know what they're suffering, and for them to know that they're not alone. And there is a whole international network that gives them support, tries to give them a voice, and tries to carry out initiatives based on solidarity. From an identity point of view, as a group, as a community, the role the network plays is crucial. And this network has been built up with, yes, it's very diverse, very plural. And there is a lot of learning, a lot of lessons that have been learned. In the Colombian case, whilst being in the conversation, these contexts had actually been used as a point of reference. What had happened in Liberia and Uganda, etc. In these places, to try and learn. And it's very important that the negotiations in Colombia have become a point of reference for the gender agenda in other armed conflict contexts. And that implies generating knowledge, generating know-how, and to disseminate it so that it's part of the knowledge that local and international organizations have. Oh, thank you very much indeed. Well, as a professor of international law, I have to say that the 10 resolutions are not just voice. They come from the Security Council, as has been said. They are the regulatory framework through which these women can claim their role, as has been explained very clearly by Madeleine. And there is another question about the change of government in the USA. You believe that the fact that Donald Trump leaves the White House will imply a positive turn in the United Nations and therefore in our agenda?
Is that to me? It's not done yet. It's not over yet. We hope it will be soon. Yes, it will. I'm quite sure of that because Biden's a multilateralist. And he firmly believes in the promotion of the multilateral system. We are hopeful that there will be an entirely new approach to the women, peace and security agenda more broadly, that they will stop the obsession with sexual reproductive rights and block everything that has any reference to it. They're obviously going to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement, which is excellent. They'll rejoin WHO. They'll hopefully play a more positive role in the World Trade Organization. One never has hope in American foreign policy, let's be honest. But it's got to be an awful lot better than the one that he's replacing. So yes, I think we're all very enthusiastic about having someone sane to be able to work with in the American administration. But it's not done yet. Let's hope.
Y particularmente en el ámbito de Naciones Unidas, porque no
Especially
podemos
in the
olvidar
context
que
of
en
the United
estos 2
Nations, we
años
can't
se ha
forget
privado
that in these
incluso la
past 2
entrada
years, they have not allowed even the entry of women to the United States because of the policies that they have implemented. I mean, if Trump really leaves the White House, it's going to be a great piece of news. And the work that feminists have been carrying out in these years, I mean, that shouldn't darken or hide the horror of the last 4 years. We can't forget the enormous contributions that the women's movement has done also from the United States to promote the agenda, and women have led the movement against Donald Trump. I mean, there is a strong society facing a government that will be much better than what we have now. I mean, but that would not be the case if there were not a strong women's movement pressuring, exerting pressure for the agenda to become a reality. Exactly. Well, thank you very much indeed to the 3 of you. It has been a brilliant webinar. I mean, people who are listening to us have many, many questions and doubts, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I hope we will see you all in our next webinars next Friday. I'd like to thank all of you organizing the organizing entities and the 3 speakers, Madeleine, Manuela, and Maria. Thank you very much. You have achieved your goals. I apologize for any technical problems that may have happened if you have not been able to listen to the interpreter. I hope you will, if you have any questions left, please do ask them through the chat and we will try and answer them.